because, hey, they walked into it thinking this was going to happen and it didn't. And now all of a sudden you got somebody that's really disappointed. So you can avoid all of that by just setting the right expectations up front. Hello, and welcome to the Real James Rondon podcast. We've got another episode tonight, and this one, it kind of crosses two bridges. It covers a little bit of ground. We're dealing with kind of the same subject, but I'm going to deal with it from two different vantage points. And that's about setting expectations. We can do this as a realtor, and we can also do this as an investor or landlord as well. And I want to deal with it from both sides. So it's very important. It's hugely important to do this. And it will save you a lot of pain. It'll save you a lot of time. It'll save you a lot of grief, regardless of whichever side you're on with this. But let's first talk about as a realtor, as a real estate broker, and setting expectations. And you can do that, for example, with a home seller. Let's say you've listed a property for sale, or you're about to list it for sale. You're going to go ahead and try to market it, try to get it sold for them. It's very important that you don't just take for granted that this seller knows exactly what the selling process is. It's also important, even though they've experienced that maybe in the past once or twice or whatever, that you remember that this is something that you do all the time and something that they only do a few times maybe in their lifetime. So when you're dealing, for example, with a home seller, you want to sit down with them and you want to make sure they know that this is how things are going to go. You want to make sure that the expectations are set properly. So you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. You really want to underpromise and overdeliver. And you want to just make sure that they're very understanding of how this whole process is going to go about. I've seen situations where listings blow up in people's faces because the seller goes into it with the expectation that they're going to have 15 showings in the first couple of days and just as many offers. And, that's unrealistic. That might happen with some properties, and it might happen at certain times and in certain markets. But that's really unrealistic, and that's a false expectation, an improper expectation. And it can cause the seller to become very angry with the agent because they feel like they're not doing their job. Because, hey, they walked into it thinking this was going to happen and it didn't. And now all of a sudden you got somebody that's really disappointed. So you can avoid all of that by just setting the right expectations up front with the seller. Same thing with a buyer. Set the right expectations up front. Let them know what the market looks like. Let them know how much the competition level is. Let them know how the inventory is right now for whatever they're looking for. I always try to make sure too with buyers that, you really deal with their absolute needs as much as possible, and that you identify their wants as well. Can you get by without this? And can you get by without that? Well, what if we found a house over here that was in this location that you really want, but maybe it doesn't have, 4 bedrooms, it's only got 3, or maybe it's got an extra bathroom, but maybe it's in the finished basement and not on the main level. There's some ways to kind of navigate through some of these things and to sit down with somebody, a buyer in this instance, and find out, where they really want to be or where they really have to be. Because it can be difficult in this market with the inventory levels, with the level of competition, to find exactly what somebody wants. And also, even when they find it, like I said, with the competition level, it can become very difficult to get it. So they need to know that too, depending on how the market is. They need to know, hey, it might take a little bit of time to find the right property for you. And they need to set their expectations and their like I said, their wants and their needs as well, to try to deal with that up front so that they're not disappointed when they're not finding that house they really thought they were going to find, for maybe ever at all, or for months or months or months, or even for weeks. Maybe it takes a couple of offers. Maybe it takes several offers. Maybe they end up having to readdress everything. And after, sometimes it's interesting too, when you start looking at homes, sometimes people begin to realize on the buying end, maybe they really don't need that. Or they start looking at more homes and they say, you know what, I would be willing to sacrifice this if I could get that thing. And as a good buyer's agent, you want to be mindful of your client, and you want to communicate with them a lot too, so that as you're moving along, maybe their needs and their wants are changing. But again, like I said, set the expectations up front. Make sure they know what they're getting into so that there's not a lot of disappointment. We don't want disappointed customers. We don't want disappointed clients. So setting expectations is a good way to avoid that. When it comes to tenants, as a landlord, this is crucial for a good landlord-tenant relationship. Have a good lease that spells things out. Make sure if you've got rules that you got them written out so that they can see them and understand them. And don't just put the lease in front of them and have them sign it. Make sure, that you go through these things. You can save yourself a lot of heartache, and you can, really help the tenant-landlord relationship by dealing with stuff up front. For example, one of the biggest things that always becomes a problem, especially with multi-family properties. Let's say you have a duplex and you've got one driveway, single lane driveway, and that's your off-street parking. Well, if you don't deal with that up front, you're going to find pretty quickly that you're going to have an issue with who parks in the driveway. You're going to have an issue with somebody parking and blocking somebody into the driveway. It can become a mess, and you're going to have people fighting, and it could turn into blood sport. It could turn into a war. And had you dealt with it up front, maybe said, okay, only the lower tenant gets the driveway unless there's a snow emergency, or you find some way to hash out their schedules. Maybe this person works at night, maybe the other person works at the day. The best thing is to, again, deal with that up front. Other things, very important on the expectation sides, let them know, when their rent is due. Let them know how you want the rent paid, where you want it paid, all of these types of things. Don't just assume they're going to figure it out. Make sure they know these things. Make sure that when it comes to, not just the rules, but just some of the common sense things, that you don't take it for granted that they're aware of this. For example, you've got a two-family property. Let's say you have one door on the back, and you've got that one door on the back goes to the upper, and it goes to the lower, and then the lower has also got a door on the front. That person upstairs only has one way into their unit. It's through that back door, right? They're going to want to use that back door, obviously, to get in and out. Let's say you have the lower, they're using that door too. Let's say you have the lower leaving that door unlocked or leaving that door open. Now the upper's like, hey, wait a minute, why are you leaving that door open? Anybody could just get up, and get into the hallway or whatever. And it becomes a problem. When you have those kind of situations, make sure the lower tenant knows you're going to use your front door predominantly. Just use the back door when you have to, and make sure you keep it locked and make sure you keep it shut. set those expectations with the new tenants, set those expectations with both tenants. When you have a situation where, I just had this recently a couple of times where I had a new tenant move in and the unit had been vacant for quite some time. Now, that can be a little bit of a problem because the other tenant in the property, these were both 2 units, so there was just one other tenant in the property, but that other tenant has grown accustomed to quiet. They've grown accustomed to having the driveway to themselves. They've grown accustomed to nobody else opening and closing the doors, no noise, like I said, no issues. Now all of a sudden, they've got somebody else living right on top of them, right next to them, whatever. And that can be a little bit of a messy situation if it's not dealt with up front and dealt with properly. So in those situations, set expectations not just for the new tenant, but also make sure to talk to the existing tenant and say, hey, look, you got a new tenant, a new neighbor coming in. Here's what you should expect. So one more thing I like to always, and there's a lot of these things we could go through, but on the landlord-tenant side, I want to make sure that the tenants know about repairs. It's very important for a lot of tenants that if there's something broke, that it's fixed. And I always tell tenants right up front, I say, hey, we're going to repair anything that needs to be repaired. We're not going to rebuild the place. I always tell them that. But if something breaks, we're going to, we'll get to it. But we're going to do it in a priority sense. We're going to prioritize certain repairs over others. For example, if it's winter and the furnace goes out, that's a big deal. Okay, we're going to prioritize that over my closet door squeaks or, the toilets, the toilet seat's a little loose or whatever. So up front, I always tell my tenants, hey, look, this is how we approach it. This is how we do it. I also make sure that they know, let us know about repairs right away. We need to know right away. But have that expectation that we'll get to it, but we're going to prioritize. And, in the winter, if you have a cold snap and all of a sudden the furnace goes out, it may be hard to get people over to fix it. It may be hard to get the HVAC guy over there. If it happens in the middle of the night, it may be impossible to get somebody over there until the next day or whatever. Be prepared yourself and expect these things kind of yourself as a landlord. Maybe have some space heaters, ready on hand for when you hit that winter period, just in case somebody needs them for an overnight or whatever until you can get it repaired by an HVAC person. So just some thoughts on expectations. I think it's really important, not just like I said for landlords and tenants, but also for buyers and for sellers. We need to know what we're getting into so that we don't have a lot of disappointment and so that we don't set ourselves and other people up for failure. So anyways, thank you for stopping by. I'd like you to subscribe if you can. Hit like. Make sure to share the video. I'd love it if you shared the video. We want to get this content out to people to help them out as much as we can. And in the comment section, make sure to share something, what you thought about the video. Maybe if you've got any ideas as well, maybe some ideas that you might have on some topics we could talk about here in the future. So thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.